Night. Only a dim light illuminates the old abandoned gas station where Sandra Bullock decides to make a short stop. Around her, there is silence and emptiness, as if this world exists only for her. She begins to fill up her car, hoping to soon reach the nearest motel. But suddenly, out of the darkness, several motorcyclists appear. They wear leather jackets, their faces showing aggressive expressions. One of them, tall and with a smug grin, heads toward her. "Are you alone?" he asks mockingly, taking a step forward. Sandra feels her heart start to race. The problem, one she hadn't expected to face at this moment, is just beginning. And in that moment, when the biker extends his hand toward her, she feels a cold wave of fear wash over her. This is not just a random encounter. Sandra looks around for help, but sees no one nearby. Keanu Reeves had long grown tired of crowded cities and noisy meetings. He preferred solitude and peace. When he arrived in this secluded spot, he hoped for at least a few hours of quiet. His plan was simple: fill up, relax a bit in the car, and prepare for the next leg of the journey. But this place turned out to be not as peaceful as he had expected. When he parked at the abandoned station, his intuition immediately told him that something was wrong. Everything around him was too quiet, too dead, as if the place itself was expecting trouble. And then, when he heard the sound of motorcycles, his attention immediately shifted. The bikers, whom he had been thinking about, were now slowly approaching the gas station. Keanu didn't intervene right away. He preferred to observe, waiting for the right moment. He lit a cigarette, leaning against his car, trying not to draw attention to himself. But his gaze never left the group of bikers. They were too confident, and one of them, in particular, was especially unsettling. He knew that this group wasn't just a bunch of random travelers. There was a hidden purpose in their movements, one that left no room for coincidence. Meanwhile, Sandra was standing at the pump, filling her car, unaware of the danger surrounding her. She felt their approach even before they spoke. All she wanted was to finish fueling and head to the nearest motel to rest after the long journey. But now her peace was disrupted by men in leather jackets moving toward her. She tried to ignore it, not paying attention to the aggression coming from them. A thought flashed through her mind, that nothing could happen on this deserted stretch of road. But her intuition told her that her concerns were justified. There was a sense of threat in the air. The bikers started a conversation, but Sandra immediately sensed that this wasn't going to be anything simple, but something far more serious. The first one, tall, with a vivid tattoo on his neck, approached too closely. He asked if she was afraid to be out there alone. Her attempt to smile and brush the situation off didn't work. The man wasn't backing down. "Don't you trust yourself?" he said, leaning forward. "I see you're alone here. Maybe you want some company?" A chill ran through Sandra's chest. She instinctively felt she shouldn't stay there. Her gaze quickly shifted to the side, but she saw no help. She continued to keep her composure, but her heart began to race. Keanu continued to observe, his eyes never leaving what was happening. He knew this moment could be decisive. Not deciding to intervene immediately, he kept watching, hidden in the shadows of his car. But when one of the bikers came too close and started threatening Sandra, he made his decision. He was not the type to stand by when he saw injustice. Keanu quickly and silently exited the car, heading toward the group of bikers. His movements were confident and quiet, as if he knew what was happening and was ready for action. He hardly made a sound, moving across the dirt ground, trying not to draw attention. His eyes tracked every movement. The bikers didn't notice his approach. He knew that when the moment came, he would need to act fast. "I can't just stand here and watch," Keanu thought to himself as the biker continued to harass Sandra. He got closer, feeling his heartbeat steady. When his steps became audible, the bikers froze. One of them, the particularly aggressive one, turned and stepped in his path. Keanu felt that everything now depended on how he approached the situation. He didn't want to make unnecessary noise, but he couldn't let these people continue. He was ready to use force if needed, but his intuition told him that his calmness would achieve the desired result. "Let her go," Keanu said calmly, standing between the bikers and Sandra. His voice was firm but not aggressive. The bikers stopped. His calmness made them freeze in place. Sandra looked around, not understanding who this man was, but feeling a strange relief that her life was now in someone else's hands. At that moment, the tension in the air became almost tangible. The bikers were on edge, not understanding who this man was and what he was doing there. One of them tried to respond, but Keanu, never taking his eyes off him, stepped forward quickly. He was ready to act. Sandra felt her heart race faster. She didn't understand who this stranger was, but everything in her body told her that his help was no accident. "Don't mess with him," the same aggressive biker said, trying to regain his composure. But Keanu could no longer wait. At that moment, everything stopped. The biker's expression changed and he took a step back. The bikers began to retreat. The tension didn't disappear, but they left, not getting what they wanted. Sandra, still a little shaken by what had happened, looked at Keanu. He looked straight into her eyes, understanding that his actions might have frightened her. He didn't want to scare her, but the situation required immediate action. "Are you okay?" he asked, checking her condition but not overly concerned. Sandra nodded, her voice trembling. "Thank you, I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in." Keanu nodded silently, his gaze once again focused. He knew this wasn't over. The mystery of the bikers wasn't solved. There was something bigger behind their actions, and he sensed that this encounter wasn't a coincidence. "I don't think they're random," he said. "And you're not random either." At that moment, one of the bikers standing aside found a moment to make a call and say into a radio, "Target confirmed. Proceed to Phase 2. Sandra felt her heart pounding in her chest, and her gaze darted from Keanu to the bikers. She couldn't understand what was happening, but her intuition told her they weren't going to back off that easily. Thoughts flashed through her mind about how quickly this situation could spiral out of control. Keanu stood in front of her, confident in his actions, but his eyes were filled with awareness. He knew this wouldn't be the end of his involvement. The bikers had retreated, but their aggression hadn't disappeared. It seemed they were ready to regain control of the situation, and Keanu realized he was at a turning point. "Decided to be a hero, huh?" one of the bikers sneered. There was no fear in his voice, only contempt and aggression. He wasn't used to anyone getting in the way of his plans. Sandra felt the weight in her legs. She wasn't prepared for her life to be in danger here, at this abandoned stretch of road. She looked at Keanu again, trying to understand what was going to happen now. Keanu knew there was no time to waste. He had already felt that action was needed. But at that moment, the bikers, seeing that he wasn't backing down, started to surround him. One of them, with a bright tattoo on his neck, stepped forward, showing they weren't planning to back off just like that. "If you want to leave alive, leave now," the biker said, but his voice already carried a hint of unease. He hadn't expected anyone to stand against him with such resolve. Keanu exhaled and prepared himself. He knew that if he didn't act now, the situation would become even more dangerous. And at that moment, his instincts kicked in. He quickly moved forward and, with one swift motion, knocked the knife out of the biker's hand, sending him to the ground. The remaining bikers froze, not believing their eyes. Keanu had once again become the unseen and dangerous person they hadn't expected to encounter. Sandra couldn't believe what was happening. She stood there, stunned, not knowing what to do. Her life had turned upside down in an instant. When the bikers retreated, Keanu stayed where he was, unmoving, continuing to watch them. Sandra, catching her breath, looked at him, not understanding who this man was or what he wanted. "Thank you," she said, but her voice trembled with the emotions. She didn't know what would happen next, but at that moment she felt like everything would be okay. However, her intuition told her that this wasn't the end. "You saved me, but you don't understand what happened," Keanu replied. He couldn't shake the feeling that these bikers weren't the simple thugs they appeared to be. There was something hidden behind their actions. Sandra felt her chest tighten with worry. Everything had happened too fast, and she didn't know whose side to take, whom to listen to, and who to trust. Her internal conflict only grew stronger. "They're not just thugs," Keanu continued, his eyes becoming more wary. "I've seen them before. These are not random people." Sandra tensed up. She felt her life change right before her eyes. But she couldn't understand how it happened and why she had been pulled into this game. At that moment, Keanu turned and noticed one of the bikers standing off to the side, watching them and whispering into a radio. His voice was clear, and every word pulled them from their familiar world. "Target confirmed. Proceed to Phase 2. Sandra and Keanu exchanged glances, realizing that now they were part of something much larger. They tried to make sense of what was happening, but the answers weren't obvious. At that moment, a shadow of worry appeared on Keanu's face. He knew that the biker's words on the radio were not a coincidence. They were on the brink of uncovering some secret they hadn't even suspected. Sandra felt her body tense up. The fear that she had been drawn into such a situation gripped her mind. "What does this mean?" she asked, looking at Keanu. "It means that everything that has happened is part of a bigger plan," he said, his voice heavy. "And if we don't figure out what's behind this, we'll be in even greater danger." Sandra tried to comprehend what lay ahead. She thought she was just passing through, but now she had become part of a conspiracy. She wondered who was really behind this plot and what awaited her now. Suddenly, another motorcycle appeared out of the darkness, and the biker approached with a threatening look in his eyes. But this wasn't the same biker they had encountered earlier. He wasn't alone. Sandra and Keanu found themselves in an even more dangerous situation. They realized that the bikers weren't just chasing her, they were doing it for some specific reason. Who were they really? Why had they been following her? The bikers started to get closer again, but this time everything seemed even more menacing. Keanu, never taking his eyes off the road, felt that the situation could end much worse than he had expected. "Stay close to me," he said to Sandra, but there was concern in his voice. At that moment, Sandra asked herself the main question: what should I do now? And who are these people? The bikers stopped and another figure appeared from behind them, a man in a dark suit, walking confidently. There was something intimidating in his eyes. "This is the end of the game for both of you," he said, and everything around them froze. Sandra and Keanu got in the car and continued driving down the empty road. Inside, everything was boiling. Her thoughts were a mess, and her heart was still pounding in her chest. Everything happening felt too unreal to be true. She couldn't believe she had been pulled into a situation she could never have imagined. Just a few hours ago, her only worry had been the long journey and the fatigue of the road. Now she was at the center of something much more dangerous. "I have to understand something, Keanu," she said, breaking the silence in the car. "Why me?" "Why specifically me?" Keanu silently looked at the road, his hands firmly gripping the wheel. He knew that now he needed to stay composed, but he couldn't help but feel the tension building inside him. He had been in this world for a long time, and such situations were familiar to him. But this was different. He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing. Their lives would now be at risk until they uncovered all the secrets. "You were in the right place at the right time," he said after a pause. "They're watching you, but none of this is accidental. You know something, Sandra, and that something is the reason they're after you." Sandra thought for a moment. She tried to recall everything that had happened over the past few days. Strange calls, mysterious messages. She began to realize that her life might be far more complicated than she had thought. "What if I'm just a random victim?" she asked uncertainly. "What if I don't know anything?" Keanu, without slowing down, glanced at her. "Maybe, but I don't think this is a coincidence. You've been chosen, and you're about to find out why. A few hours later, they reached a small town hidden in the darkness. Keanu suggested taking a break and looking around. He didn't trust what was happening and wanted to find at least the slightest clue that could explain what had occurred. Sandra agreed, but her thoughts were still tangled. They stopped near an abandoned cafe, and Keanu suggested they go inside to calm down and focus. Inside, it was empty and quiet, with only the faint light from old lamps. "What are we looking for, Keanu?" Sandra asked, interrupting his thoughts. She didn't know what to expect, but she understood that there was more hidden here than they could imagine. Keanu silently moved toward a table by the window, looking at a map. "We need to find out who they are and what they're guarding. Your role in this is no accident." At that moment, he noticed something on the table, an old photograph covered in dust. He picked it up and examined it closely. The photo showed a man who looked strikingly similar to one of the bikers they had encountered at the gas station. Standing next to him was a group of people dressed in formal suits. "This is strange," muttered Keanu. "Look at who's here. These aren't just random people." Sandra stepped closer and, looking at the photo, felt cold sweat break out on her forehead. They weren't just bikers. These people, they're working with someone, and they're not ordinary criminals. Keanu placed the photo back on the table, deep in thought. He knew Sandra couldn't have just ended up in this situation by chance. There were no random people in her path. These were people with a purpose. He continued to analyze everything that had happened. The bikers were clearly agents, but agents of what? Who did they report to? What was in those documents they were guarding? Sandra felt her heart race again. "Why was I pulled into this, Keanu? Who are these people?" "You're not just a victim, Sandra," he replied. "You're part of a bigger game. These people are guarding information that could change everything. And now that you're at the center of this game, you can't just walk away." Sandra felt everything in her mind click into place. She wasn't just a random victim. Her life was tied to something much bigger. This information could be the key to something enormous. "And now what?" she asked, feeling a growing sense of anxiety in her chest. "Now we need to find out who's behind all this," Keanu said, standing up. "And for that, we need to go back to where it all began." They returned to the highway, but before they could get far, they noticed they were being followed. Keanu quickly realized that the bikers hadn't backed off. He switched his attention to the rearview mirror and noticed two motorcycles following them with clear intent. "They're still following us," Keanu said, his voice growing more serious. "What do we do?" Sandra asked, feeling her fear intensify. Everything was too dangerous, and she couldn't figure out how to get out of this situation. "We keep moving, but we need to be ready for anything. We can't back down," he replied. But a few minutes later, their car was surrounded. The bikers stopped right in front of them, and from the shadows, one of the bikers emerged with a serious expression on his face. In his eyes, there was not only fear, but also determination. "You won't leave until you understand what's going on," the biker said, and his words were filled with menace. Keanu and Sandra got out of the car, understanding that from this moment forward, their lives depended on how they handled this man and his people. Sandra, despite her fear, felt her determination grow. She couldn't just give up. "Who are you, and what do you want from me?" Sandra asked, trying to hide the tremble in her voice. The biker stepped forward, his face cold. "We're guarding something important. What you accidentally discovered is now at risk, and if you don't understand what's going on, the consequences will be serious." Keanu stood between them, ready for any development. "Tell us what we need to know, and if you don't, the consequences for you won't be any better." "Do you think you can stop us?" the biker said, laughing. "You have no idea what's going on here." At that moment, the biker took a step back, pulling something from his pocket. It was an old key. "Now you won't be able to leave until you figure out what it opens." The small town was behind them now, and the road ahead opened up again. But with each mile traveled down the night highway, the tension in the air grew more palpable. Keanu and Sandra felt that they weren't just following the road. They were caught in a game where every mistake could be fatal. "We can't continue like this," Keanu said, his voice serious. "They won't leave us alone. We need to come up with something." Sandra, not taking her eyes off the road, felt her thoughts start to scatter. She wasn't ready for this race against fate. Every moment felt like an impending explosion, and she couldn't understand how her life had become this way. Strange messages, strange people. It was all connected. All of it had led her to this moment, where every new step was crucial. "What do we do?" she asked, feeling the tension rise within her. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and her mind was filled with fragments of chaotic thoughts. This wasn't just a chase. This was a high-stakes game. "We can't just leave," Keanu answered, his eyes fixed firmly on the road. "They know where we are. We need to track them down before they find us." The brakes squeaked as the car slowed down. Keanu sharply turned onto a narrow path hidden from the main highway, hoping the bikers wouldn't notice their maneuver. But he knew this was just a delay. They stopped the car in the shadow of some trees, and Keanu and Sandra sat silently for a few minutes, staring into the darkness. Everything around them was quiet, and it seemed like there was no threat to their safety. But Keanu knew. The silence was deceiving. "We need to act," he said, turning to Sandra. "We can't stay here for long. They might track us." "Are you sure we should continue?" Sandra asked. "What if they're just waiting for us? We could be walking into a trap." Keanu sighed. He could see that Sandra was on the edge of panic, but he couldn't afford to doubt. "We need to find out who they are. These aren't just random pursuers. We have a chance to figure out what they want and who's behind this." Sandra looked at him, trying to understand. She wasn't ready to play such a dangerous game. But then, she felt it. Her decision was no longer hers to make. Everything was happening so fast, and she had to trust him because, perhaps, this was the only way to survive. "All right," she said, her voice soft but determined. "What do we do?" "We track them," Keanu replied, opening the car door. "You're not alone in this, Sandra. We'll do this together." Sandra and Keanu carefully climbed out of the car, looking around for signs of the bikers. They moved quietly along the road, step by step, keeping a close eye on every sound. The dark grass crunched beneath their feet, and in the distance they could hear a faint hum of engines, but the sound wasn't clear. The bikers didn't seem to be getting any closer. "We need to figure out where they're hiding," Keanu said. He slowed his steps and listened carefully, his intuition telling him that there could be a hidden base nearby. They moved toward a small forest where the night's shadow hid more than they could see. There were few sounds in the forest besides nocturnal creatures, but there was an underlying sense of danger in the air. Suddenly, Keanu stopped and gestured toward some bushes where something was moving. "We're not alone," he whispered. Suddenly, a light flashed. A bright burst appeared just a few meters away from them, behind the trees. The bikers started to approach, but now they were armed and ready for a fight. "Run!" Keanu shouted, grabbing Sandra's hand and pulling her in the opposite direction. They sprinted deeper into the forest, but the light from their pursuers wasn't letting them escape. "They won't leave us!" Sandra screamed, feeling her legs losing strength. "Hold on!" Keanu replied, realizing that their chances of success were dwindling with every passing second. "We need to find cover." They ran for a few more meters until they found an old abandoned cabin hidden in thick brush. Keanu shoved the door open, and it creaked as it barely moved. Inside, it was dark and the air was thick with dust. The cabin hadn't been used in a long time, but it could serve as a temporary shelter. They closed the door behind them and both stopped, trying to catch their breath. "We can't keep going like this," Sandra said, nervously looking around. "They'll keep chasing us until we figure out what's going on." Keanu paused for a moment, then said, "We're almost there." We need to understand what they're guarding. We have to get on their trail, find their base." Once they caught their breath and calmed down a bit, Keanu said, "I know how they operate. These bikers are part of something bigger. The question isn't how we get away from them. The question is how we uncover what's behind this." "You want us to go back to them?" Sandra asked, her eyes full of fear. "Yes," Keanu replied, his face serious. "But this time we'll be ready." Suddenly, a noise came from outside. Something was moving in the forest, and Keanu felt that the bikers were close. They were preparing to attack again. The sound of footsteps outside grew louder with each passing moment. Keanu tensed up and prepared for a fight. Now that they were so close to uncovering the truth, they were at a decisive crossroads, to surrender or to fight for their lives. Sandra felt her breath grow heavier. The sound of footsteps outside grew louder, as if something large and relentless was approaching. Keanu stood in front of her, his gaze resolute. They were trapped. The shelter wouldn't protect them for long from the pursuit. But he knew that if they didn't act now, their chances of survival would rapidly diminish. "Don't move," Keanu whispered, his voice cold and firm. He cautiously peered out of the old cabin window, trying to see who or what was approaching. Sandra's heart raced with tension, and her mind was scrambling to find answers to the big question. Who were they, and what did they want? Then she heard it. A whisper, very quiet, barely distinguishable. It came from someone outside the cabin. Sandra froze, her body tense like a string. Keanu tensed up and, taking a step back, froze. He knew this night could be decisive. "They've found us," he said, his voice foretelling no good. A faint rustling came from the darkness of the cabin. Someone passed by their hiding place without noticing them. But Keanu knew. It wasn't a random person. Sandra pressed herself against the wall, unable to breathe until the sound of footsteps faded. She couldn't tell how much time had passed, but it felt like it stretched on forever. In that moment, she felt Keanu's gaze on her. His eyes were full of understanding, and she realized they were on the edge. "It's a trap," he said, glancing out the window, never taking his eyes off the darkness. Suddenly, when everything around them fell silent again, an indistinguishable sound echoed from outside. A grinding of metal. It was a sound that left no doubt. They were not just wasting time, they were on the verge of an encounter with someone they couldn't defeat. "So, we're in for a fight," Keanu said, turning to Sandra, his face becoming serious. "Are you ready?" Sandra felt her heart contract. She still couldn't believe she had found herself in this situation, but she already knew that she had no choice. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling with fear but with determination in it. "Good," Keanu nodded. "Then let's not waste time. These aren't just bikers, Sandra. It's no coincidence that you ended up here." "What do you mean?" she asked, not understanding how this was connected to her life. "You're at the center of conspiracies that no one can control," Keanu replied, his eyes full of focus. "You'll see who you're dealing with." At that moment, the door of the cabin creaked, and a silhouette appeared in the doorway. The light from the flashlights illuminated his face. He was tall, with a serious expression and cold eyes, like an experienced hunter. "Finally," he said. Sandra felt her legs go weak. This man wasn't a biker. He was different, not like the ones they had encountered before. His suit was impeccably black, and his movements were lightning fast and precise. He was a professional, and this moment would be the last one they could survive if they didn't act decisively. "You don't understand who you're dealing with," the man said, his voice low and penetrating. "We're not following you by accident. We've been sent after you, and now you understand what you need to do." Keanu stood in front of Sandra, never taking his eyes off the enemy. "I don't think you came here to talk," he said, calmly taking a combat stance. The man smirked. "Talk? Number, you're right. It's time to finish this." He took a step forward, and at that moment, Keanu didn't doubt it. They had no choice now. Either they win or they die. Suddenly, another figure emerged from behind the cabin door. He wasn't armed, but his face was familiar. It was one of the bikers they had encountered at the gas station. His gaze was filled with ominous determination. Sandra froze, her eyes locked on this new person. She recognized him. It was the biker who had spoken into the radio. He was part of something much bigger than just a random criminal. "You," Sandra said, barely holding back her breath. "Yes, I am," the biker replied, his voice confident. "But now you need to understand who you really are." His words shocked Sandra. He wasn't just a criminal. He was part of a structure that had used her for its own purposes. She could no longer deny the truth to herself. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice no longer trembling but firm. "Don't think you're random in this," the biker said, his eyes flashing. "You're an important part of this project, and now you need to understand that you were chosen, not by chance." At that moment, the man in the black suit turned to the biker and said, "You didn't understand. She's not one of us. She's been used. Now we need to make sure she won't pose a threat to the project anymore." Now, Sandra and Keanu were in the heart of the storm. The mystery behind this conspiracy was beginning to unfold. Sandra felt that her life would never be the same again. Everything that had happened to her turned out to be part of something monumental. The puzzle she needed to solve was on the verge of completely changing her understanding of reality. "You need to understand," Keanu said, turning to Sandra. "You're the key. You've been part of all of this from the very beginning." Sandra looked at him in surprise and confusion. "The key? What do you mean?" "You were chosen, Sandra. These people are following you because you have what they need." Keanu said these words quietly but with great force. Suddenly, everything around them went silent. The man in the black suit stepped forward and said, "You understand. We started with you. You can't walk away from this." Sandra, realizing that her life was just beginning, braced herself for the truth she would soon face. Now, with the threat closing in, Sandra and Keanu revealed all the cards. The bikers were not ordinary criminals after all. They were agents guarding crucial information that could change the balance of their world. The documents they were protecting had ended up in Sandra's hands, and this was the defining moment for the entire state. In the end, they won, but not without losses. It was a fight for survival and for the truth. The mystery was unveiled, and the world would never be the same. Climax. Keanu and Sandra, standing amidst the wreckage of the situation, looked at each other. What now? Who else would play their part in this process? The world they had entered was just beginning.